Okay, we're going to get started. We have a lot to cover this evening. I want to remind everyone who's logged on already that this meeting is being recorded. Okay, I'm going to pass it to District Ranger Tristan Flaherty immediately, and you can kick us off. Go ahead, Tristan. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Holly. And want to welcome everyone and thank everyone for joining us tonight for this webinar. The public involvement in this process has been very valuable in developing not just the original proposal, but the other alternatives that have been developed. And I don't think sometimes we really do a good job of explaining how the public comments and the public involvement have really shaped what we're putting forth as the draft environmental impact statement. So I wanted to just give a brief history and how that's really played out. The original planning process started back in 2017 with the development of the master plan for the Mendenhall. And that took a couple years and was completed in February of 2019, but involved a lot of public comment to develop that plan. And after that plan was completed, we moved into an environmental analysis in February of 2020. And that's really our second most stringent NEPA process. It allows us, the advantage of using that is it allows us to move a little bit more quickly than doing a full environmental impact statement. We had an open comment period after that was proposed. And based on the public comments we received from that, it was decided that we really needed to do the full economic or environmental impact statement. So again, that was the first instance of really shaping this NEPA process from the comments that we received. So in December of 2020, we came out with a proposed action for the environmental impact statement and then had another open comment period. And based on the comments we received during that comment period, we decided that instead of just having the proposed action, we needed two additional alternatives. So that's if you've been to the project website, that would be alternative 2 was the proposed action, alternative 3 and 4 were the two alternatives that were developed off of those comments. After that comment period closed, we went back and we still thought that we needed to include some more alternatives based on the feedback that we were getting, that the location of the visitor center, the parking lot configuration, and some of the other components of that. We really wanted to go back and analyze that and provide that information to the public again. So that's kind of where we're at now with the supplemental draft. And again, we're opening it up for another comment period and really wanting to get the feedback from the public and what people think about it. We did hold an open house out at the visitor center on Tuesday, and I think we got a lot of good feedback there, both in favor of some things and things that people would rather see. And we're really looking forward to getting more feedback from the folks, both on the webinar here or questions from people on the webinar, and also getting comments submitted online at the end of the process. And with that, I'll turn it back to Holly. And again, want to express my appreciation for folks that showed up tonight.
Thank you, Tristan, very much. Okay, you can go to the next slide, Monique, I think. Okay, what we're gonna cover tonight. Tonight's purpose is Monique will give you a very thorough presentation on the supplemental draft environmental impact statement. And the purpose of that is for you to be able to listen to a presentation and to be able to ask questions and to be able to clarify information for you so that you can then submit official comments for the supplemental draft environmental impact statement. Please remember that any comments or questions you ask tonight are not included in the official public record for the project. It is important for you to submit comments through the official comment methods. So just remember, tonight's purpose is for you to help develop the comments that you will eventually submit. Okay, I think that's very important to remember. The comment deadline is February 21st. Keep that in mind so that you're prepared for that. We're going to give you an introduction to the project team. I'm going to go over some rules and logistics on how to participate tonight. There'll be a presentation, including likely about an hour for question and answers. And then we'll wrap up and then remind you how to submit comments. Okay, go ahead, Monique. Some etiquette for tonight. You'll notice that the people who have their cameras on right now are all part of the project team, including that cat. So members of the project team have their cameras on and we'll introduce them in a second. Please keep your cameras off and your microphones muted. That allows the project team to get through the presentation. We're going to let Monique get through her entire presentation before we have any questions asked. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions after that presentation. And the way we're going to do that tonight, which is different than the way we did it before, is we're going to have you raise your hand to get in the queue to be able to ask a question. And you do that through your Zoom tools. And if you don't know how to do that, you click on the participant button and that'll help you raise your hand. If anybody has difficulty, we'll help you figure that out. If for whatever reason you feel more comfortable typing your question in the chat, you can do that. I will intersperse chat questions when we get to the Q&A section so that we make sure we answer all the questions in the chat too. But again, you can ask your question verbally or in the chat. Please keep in mind, we will not be monitoring the chat. Especially during the project presentation, we want people to be able to really focus on the information Monique is giving. If you ask a question in the chat during her presentation, we'll get to it after the presentation, okay? My colleague Peyton, she will post some important links in the chat right now. She's going to post the project website. She'll post how to comment. She'll post important contact information and the comment deadline. All right. And we'll do that at the end so that you have access to that again. There's a lot of people in attendance today. When we do get to your questions, please keep them brief so that we can get to as many as possible. February 21st, that's the comment deadline. We're going to say that many times. And again, this session is being recorded. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Monique. I'm going to have the project team introduce themselves. Please do this quickly. Tristan, he already introduced himself. We'll go to James King next. Go ahead, James.
Good evening, everyone. My name is James King. I am the Regional Director of Recreation, Lands, and Minerals for the Alaska region of the Forest Service.
Thanks, James. Go ahead, Monique.
Hi, everyone. My name is Monique Nelson. I'm the NEPA project manager for this project, and I'm the Director of Planning and Information Management for the Alaska region for the Forest Service.
I think we have Frank on tonight. Frank, would you like to introduce yourself? It's okay if you don't want to.
Hey, thank you. Frank Sherman. I am the acting forest supervisor on Tongass National Forest. I apologize that the camera is just not working tonight. I'm calling from a bunkhouse.
Okay, we'll go to Pete next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Pete Schneider. I am the Recreation Staff Officer at the Juneau Ranger District and want to thank everybody for attending tonight.
Okay, go ahead, Pat.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Pat Hewer, the environmental coordinator and NEPA specialist on the Tongass and for the project team.
Okay, so there's some consultant staff today here as well. Go ahead, Carrie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carrie Conacher. I am with Solstice Alaska Consulting, and we are the NEPA EIS writing team.
And Robin.
This is Robin Reich. I'm with Solstice as well and working with Carrie on the EIS.
Okay, go ahead, Brian.
Hi, I'm Brian Meisner. I'm the design team lead, and this is Ellie.
And my name is Holly Spoth Torres. I've been doing stakeholder and public involvement. I have a small company called Huddle AK, and I have Peyton Johnson with me. She'll be in the chat. You'll be seeing her name as well. Thank you. Go ahead, Monique.
I think this is where I kick it off.
Okay.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. I may have seen many of you at the open house on Tuesday and appreciate your involvement and commitment to this project. My plan tonight is to give a little bit of an overview to make sure we catch anybody up who hasn't been involved for a long time. And then I'll dive into some details to make sure that you understand what was presented last year in the draft environmental impact statement and what additions have been made this winter for our consideration. To back way up, I just want to remind folks that, the purpose of this effort here is to update infrastructure and continue to create recreation opportunities at the Mendenhall Glacier recreation area that can accommodate projected visitor use, both local and visitors from abroad, while protecting the unique characteristics and outstanding beauty of the area, which we all love. The little map on the side here gives a little bit of an overview of the different kinds of proposals that we've been considering over the years. This is included on a project poster. You maybe have seen it before. Some of the big things are improvements to the existing visitor center and a proposed new welcome center, parking access and expansion, improvements to Steep Creek, including the Steep Creek boardwalk and trail, as well as restoration for the creek itself. New spur road trailheads on the Glacier Spur Road, improved trails in Dredge Lakes. Some of the alternatives propose a motorized boat service that would take folks from the visitor center across to a remote glacier area. Some of the alternatives, most of them propose a lakeshore trail that leads from the visitor center area over to the campground. We've proposed public use cabins at the Mendenhall campground, and some improved trails over on the West Glacier side. So that's kind of the general scope of the things we're considering right now. Tristan went over the process that we've been through since the beginning of this. A master plan was completed in 2019, and based on that, we kicked off the NEPA process, and we've been working on that National Environmental Policy Act process, which includes both environmental analysis and public involvement since 2020. We're down here right now sharing a supplemental draft environmental impact statement, and we've got a couple of steps left, including finalizing the environmental impact statement and sharing a draft of the decision, and then finalizing that record of decision. And we expect to finish up the project with that decision this summer. So ultimately, what we're presenting to you right now is the supplemental draft environmental impact statement, which is a few hundred pages long and includes a tremendous amount of content. It is a lot for folks to get through, and so we'll share an overview primarily of the alternatives tonight. But if you dive into this, it's got information on the purpose and need for the project, the different alternatives that we're considering, the environmental consequences of those alternatives. So what kind of impacts would it have to the environment? And then things that I want to point out to you is that in the back of that book and posted as part 2 of the SDEIS online is a visitor capacity analysis, an adaptive management plan, some visual renderings, and then some additional supporting analyses. So quite a lot just in the EIS to peruse online. Everything is posted to our project website. At the end, I'll bring it up real quick, but we've tried to share this link broadly. I've had a couple of requests for some summary information, things that are a little bit easier to digest than that big EIS. So I recommend if you log into there, go under the supplemental draft environmental impact statement link, and then look for the open house posters. Those do a really nice job of summarizing the project. I'll be using some of those tonight. Look for an alternatives comparison table. That's included in the EIS, but it does a really nice job in like one-liners describing all the different things that we're considering. And then if you want to dive in, you can take a look at the EIS itself. There's also a tremendous amount of supporting information, additional resource reports, if you're interested in a deep dive there. This is what the alternatives comparison table looks like. So just kind of sharing that to point it out to folks as a resource. Nice and easy to look at, aspects of the project and then compare all the different ways that we're considering implementing them. All right, so back to the beginning. I am going to do a deep dive on some things, but what I want to emphasize for everyone tonight is that I don't want you to feel burdened by memorizing which component or which little nuance is attached to which alternative. I think the most important thing for those who are interested in the project and want to help shape the outcome of the project is to just identify the things that you think are positive or negative about what's being proposed. Provide any rationale you have for why you think something is a good idea or a bad idea. And it doesn't matter if you get it right, whether it was part of alternative 2 or alternative 3. In the end, we will consider all comments to shape what that final decision will look like. So don't get too hung up on which alternative each little piece is associated with. I'll also, at the beginning here, kind of bring everybody together in context that we've analyzed a bunch of different alternatives, and the whole point here is to update infrastructure to accommodate increasing use. Right now, we're seeing about 700,000 visitors to the Mendenhall each year, and the alternatives that we're analyzing are being considered and being designed to accommodate an increase in visitor use. So this is just copied out of some tables in the visitor capacity analysis. You're welcome to take a closer look at it. But want to point out to people that, some of the alternatives like alternative 2 and 5 are being designed to accommodate a larger increase, while others like alternative 4 are being designed to accommodate not as great of an increase. And you can see that in some of the infrastructure proposals. All right, so I'm going to start by diving into the most visited area of the recreation area, the visitor center unit, and some of the highest profile proposals of this project. So we'll start with the proposed welcome center and expanded parking in the visitor center unit. This here that we're looking at is alternative 2. It's what we originally proposed, as Tristan was describing back in December of 2020. And it includes a welcome center that replaces the pavilion that's there now and kind of extends into what is currently the parking lot. So this welcome center replaces the existing pavilion, includes a beautiful patio and some extra space for walking and amphitheater space for some ranger talks and interactive experiences. It also expands parking by filling Zigzag Pond, which is here right now, and including a larger bus drop-off area to reduce congestion for buses, and also expands parking for private vehicles and has those side by side. This is the original proposal that we came out with. We heard back from folks that they would like to see us analyze something that does not fill in Zigzag Pond. So when we put together the draft EIS, we looked at a couple of different alternatives to that. These include the same welcome center design over here. Also, I should point out this crescent bridge. We call this the crescent bridge that would lead people over from the welcome center over to the historic visitor center. But we shifted parking so that the commercial bus loop comes up here for drop-off purposes. Zigzag Pond is not filled in, but has a nice walkway that goes across it to give folks parking in this second lot, easy access to the welcome center and the lake shore. We also came up with a slightly different alternative there where people walk alongside Zigzag Pond, and this version in alternative 4 accommodates just slightly less parking than alternative 3 does. Those are what we presented in the spring of 2022. And we heard in many comments that folks would like to see exploration of more alternatives for the welcome center siting and the parking lot options. So just this month, we released a couple of different options that our design team and interdisciplinary team worked on over the summer and fall. Alternative 5 is a little bit different from those we just looked at, in that the Welcome Center is near the same location, but it's pulled back from the lakeshore a little bit to preserve some more of that habitat. It's split into 2 buildings, which allows access to the kettle ponds over here, as well as this newly proposed path around them for wildlife viewing, for a nice short walk for those who can't walk long distances. This design also allows a building that would be dedicated more to information to be shut down during the winter, while another building that has more of a lounge and visitor services that locals might enjoy can stay open during the winter. Has similar plaza access, but one of the other major differences about Alternative 5 is we've moved the private vehicle parking front and center so that locals and those arriving by private vehicle have access to that nearby drop-off loop. And a little bit closer parking. The buses are pulled away from the lakeshore to reduce congestion and noise and exhaust, pull that to the backside of Zigzag Pond and have that drop-off loop a little bit further away. Those who are dropped off commercially would still have a really nice walk across this bridge over to the Welcome Center. In Alternative 6, we explored something very different that was considered during the master planning process and now is brought forward as an alternative, where there's a welcome center designed to be set in the hillside adjacent to the existing historic visitor center. This was brought up during public comment in order to maintain the current pavilion and not have a large structure right on the lakeshore that would change the view from when you drive up or when you stand in this viewing area. It also accommodates all of the same features that the original proposed Welcome Center does, with information and bathrooms and seating and rain cover and food, but does so just set off to the side a little bit. It removes that crescent bridge that was proposed in the early alternatives and replaces it with a little bit of a viewing dock that is less of an obstruction to the view for those driving up. And then the parking totally changes. So here, well, it changes from the alternatives, but stays closer to how it is today, where you have a drop off here for electric shuttles. You maintain the private vehicle parking up front and center as it is right now and expand the private vehicle parking in that lower lot to allow for locals and more private vehicle access there. The commercial buses, instead of dropping off at this loop as they do right now, would park in the existing commercial staging lot where the snow storage area is for the city of Juneau, as well as where the buses hang out now. We would pave part of that parking lot and get it nicely organized for buses to be able to do their drop-offs. We would have a waiting shelter and some bathrooms over here at the drop-off, and then access to an electric shuttle that people could ride up to the lakeshore. We think that a lot of people that arrive this way would be interested in using the trails at drop-off. So to see this whole thing in scope, we have the commercial drop-off area where passengers would unload and they could choose to, say, walk the Steep Creek boardwalk all the way up to the lakeshore, hop on the Trail of Time and walk that up to the visitor center area, or use the electric shuttle, kind of a Disneyland style shuttle that would transport them up to the lakeshore for drop off. The last design that we considered was also brought up during public comment. This one considers a new welcome center that's actually set down there at the commercial bus lot. And this whole area is redesigned in Alternative 7 so that we have expanded bus parking, still maintaining the snow storage area. We have that nice bus drop-off area for people to be able to get off, orient in a plaza, find their bus easily at the end. We have the Welcome Center with most of the services, including information and lounge and bathrooms. And we have that same electric shuttle service that would transport folks up the Glacier Spur Road for a drop-off right at the lakeshore. The development over here by the Historic Visitor Center then is limited to an improved informational kiosk, some additional restrooms, and this viewing platform by the Kettle Pond to accommodate more visitors in that area. Parking stays largely the same as it is today, with private vehicle parking up front near the pavilion and then a bit of an expanded parking down here at the second lot. And there's the big picture there where people again could choose to walk a trail up to the lake shore or take the electric shuttle back and forth. All right, so those are the big options for the Welcome Center and the main parking areas in the Visitor Center unit. To show what that looks like, we completed a visual analysis, and we have these included on the posters that are easy to get off the project website. The visual analysis looks at the view shed from some of the primary viewing areas, from the drop-off loop, from the sledding hill, and from the visitor center. So we look out on alternatives 2, 3, and 4, the original proposal. You can see the Welcome Center in that area. Alternative 5 has that Welcome Center that's split and pulled back a little bit. Both of them include the Crescent Bridge. And then from those same viewing locations, alternatives 6 and 7 have a very different view where the pavilion is still in place and there's new infrastructure off to the side. You can view the Hillside Visitor Center from the sledding hill, but the viewscape remains as it is now, looking out from the Visitor Center and alternative 6 and 7. The visual analysis is included in Appendix C of the EIS, so that is available in Volume 2 of the EIS on the project website. All right, so some of the alternatives that we analyzed include motorized boat service to the glacier. And 3 out of the 7 alternatives do not include the motorized boat service, but 4 of them do. And we've looked at them in a number of different ways. I'm just going to speak to all of the different alternatives using this one slide. Essentially, the proposal is to provide motorized boat service on commercial boats starting from the visitor center and traveling across the lake over to a remote glacier area where people would be able to view the glacier and kind of experience that wild character of the area in the, that's been recently exposed by the glacier. This imagery is from 2018, and so the glacier has retreated quite a bit from where it's shown now. The white line shows its estimated location today. So some of the things that we considered are yes or no to having motorized boat service on the lake. Different alternatives explore the impacts and the pros and cons of having alternative fuel powered boats or electric powered boats. The alternatives also explore smaller versus larger sized boats that would carry, we explored 35 passengers versus 49 passengers. We also have different options for docks, launches, and landing locations. So I'll try to do a little detail for you. Alternative 2 has the alternative fuel requirement with larger boats of 49 passengers. And that original proposal had a boat put in with a ramp on the West Glacier side that would just be used to launch the boats and pull the boats at the beginning and end of the season. The boat tours would still leave from the Welcome Center side and go up to the remote glacier area. And there would be a dock at the remote glacier area for folks to get on and off the boat. Alternative 3 explored smaller boats of 35 passengers, electric powered boats, and those were proposed as landing crafts. So passengers would still get on at a dock on the visitor center side, but there would just be a landing area similar to how it is now for non-motorized crafts over by the remote glacier area. And then in the new alternatives 5 and 7, we explored the idea of having only a boat launch ramp on the West Glacier side. So we didn't have a dock, which could be tempting for people to use to launch their own motorized boats, which is not allowed, or could be frustrating for folks to not be allowed to use. So we considered just having a launch ramp over there and using the dock on the visitor center side. And then finally, we also explored the idea of launching the boats from the visitor center side and having no boat infrastructure on the West Glacier side at all. And I'll point that out a little bit when we get into trail maps, some of how that affects the visitor center area. Those alternatives that include motorized boat access also include some version of a remote glacier visitor area. The original proposal included some like mobile pods that would be able to be set up and taken down in the winter, be able to kind of follow the glacier and be reset up as the glacier moves. More recent proposals have more just of a temporary rain shelter in place for those that traverse over to the West Glacier, to the remote glacier area. All right. I'm going to switch gears a little now and talk about trails. And I do have a map for each of the alternatives that I'm going to bring up, but I'm going to move through them kind of quickly, I think, and just try to focus on the big picture here. This is an image of alternative 2. These maps are all in the EIS and available online. Alternative 2, the general proposal is to have the 3 trailheads along the Glacier Spur Road, to adopt the user-created mountain bike trails, or just trails, the single track trails that are in the Dredge Lakes area. Those are all these kind of yellow squiggly lines. And to add a lakeshore trail that kind of continues all the way from the photo point loop across the lakeshore and down to the Mendenhall campground, accessed via bridge. Other things to notice on these maps, we do propose turning the Nugget Falls Trail into a formal loop by utilizing the existing trail here and then the footpath that goes along the shoreline. And we do propose some changes to the photo point loop, turning it into a full loop. And you'll see in some of the alternatives, we have slightly different approaches to that, where we have sort of an interior versus an exterior loop. And also we proposed in our more recent alternatives for access to photo point to be only by this peninsula, freeing up this area that is kind of a high bear use, common bear crossing location. All right, so let's focus on this lakeshore trail. We just looked at it in alternative 2 following the lakeshore. When we came up with alternative 3, we modified that lakeshore trail quite a bit. In this version, it doesn't go all the way across the lakeshore in front of the visitor center and welcome center areas. It follows the lakeshore for about half of its length and then comes inland and crosses over to the Mendenhall campground. So we're looking at different ways of doing that. Otherwise, much of alternative 3 is the same as what we just looked at. We have these interior Dredge Lakes trails and the trails on the outside, as well as similar approaches to photo point and the Nugget Falls loops. One thing that you'll see in the EIS is that we propose a Dredge Lakes outer loop, and that kind of connects the proposed lakeshore trail with some proposed trails over here on the west side, and then existing trails that are already in Dredge to create an outer loop for Dredge Lakes. And some of the alternatives include a proposal for commercial use of that loop. And they vary by alternative, but when you see commercial use in Dredge Lakes, it's referring to likely bike tours that would utilize the lakeshore trail and or an outer loop all around Dredge, but not the interior trails. Alternative 4 that we presented last year shortens the lakeshore trail and pulls it inland. And this version creates a Dredge Lakes outer loop, but does not have that bridge that goes over to Mendenhall campground. Alternative 4 also doesn't adopt all of the user-created trails in Dredge Lakes. So you can see, although they exist and they are still there, they wouldn't be formally adopted and designated on our maps. All right, so here are the new alternatives, and these are pretty similar to one another. The Lakeshore Trail in alternatives 5, 6, and 7 is exactly the same. So we walked the lakeshore several times this summer and rerouted it to try to find a trail that would be able to withstand flooding well, that would create interest for users by weaving in and out of the forest and out to the shoreline, that would provide that fantastic shoreline experience to those walking over from the visitor center, getting great views of the glacier, but then pulling it inland for a number of benefits. This Lakeshore Trail and the new alternatives does connect to the Mendenhall campground for all three of them. I pointed out the differences in the boat launches and boat docks. And so I want to point out here that in alternative 5 is the one where we explored the idea of launching the boats and maintaining the boats from the visitor center unit side. And you can see this one looks a little bit different than it does on the other maps, because it would actually be a road that's used to move the boats and launch the boats. And so that would be a road open for administrative access only, but it would be quite a bit wider than what you would envision in the other alternatives. We also, in alternatives 5, 6, and 7, moved the Dredge Lakes trailhead across the road. We received some comments that thought it would be safer and better access to move it across the road, since so many users use that trail to access the Powerline trailhead, the Powerline Trail, Under Thunder, and this bike path on the east side of the street. And that's also been proposed to be enlarged from 12 stalls to 20. Alternative 6 Lakeshore looks just like alternative 5. This one differs a little in that it adopts the user-created trail and dredge, except for those that are in close proximity to Glacier Lake. They're removed in this alternative to ensure we can maintain waterfowl hunting in the Glacier Lake proximity in dredge. And alternative 7 looks really similar to those that we just viewed. All right, so those are the primary trails of interest around the visitor center unit and Dredge Lakes. I'm hopping over to the West Glacier side now to explore some of the proposals over there. We're again backing up to what we talked about early last year, which included, similar to Dredge Lakes, adopting some of the user-created trails over on the West Glacier side near Tulsh Rock, as well as exploring some of the proposals from the Nordic Ski Club that's interested in having some new sort of longer length and groomable trails in the West Glacier area. So those are those orange ones that you can see here, as well as the southern one. In last year, when we explored alternatives 2 and 3 with the Lakeshore Trail Bridge coming over to the campground, we proposed a parking area by that bridge and a new picnic area. And we got a lot of comments back on that proposal. And so we looked at it a different way for the new alternatives that we're exploring now. I'll show you those in just a moment. Here's alternative 4. It doesn't propose the single track trails or the Nordic trails. You can see it doesn't have that bridge or the parking or picnic area. The new proposals are all represented here. They too have the single track. They have a refined version of the Nordic Club proposal for a groomable ski trail. And instead of having the picnic and parking area over here by the proposed bridge over Mendenhall River, we've pulled that back and we have new parking proposed over by the skaters cabin. So right now there's one lot and we're proposing to add 2 additional connected lots of the same size to add capacity to the skaters cabin area. You know, that's primarily for local use. It gets really overcrowded during ski season on good Nordic ski days. And that'll also provide nice access for the trails when this area gets crowded with tours in the summertime. We also refined our cabins proposal a little bit in alternatives 5, 6, and 7. We have 5 cabins proposed with more specific locations here. And we also came up with a plan that would make these cabin use in the winter more feasible, where you would have walking trails and be able to groom walking trails that are not used by skiers to allow access through the center of the campground over to the cabins, and little walking trails that would be able to access the cabins over here by the lakeshore as well. So kind of worked through that difficulty, making sure folks weren't always stumping out the ski trails on the way to the public use cabins. Heading up to the remote glacier area, I'm just going to show alternative 2 here and then kind of talk about the other options that we've considered. You can see the top of the West Glacier high loop as originally proposed. This one looks pretty similar to what's proposed in the new alternatives. All alternatives also include this West Glacier spur trail that many folks are familiar with. So this spur trail right now is kind of a footpath. It does have the markers on it from where the glacier has been over time, but it's a pretty challenging trail. There's some, a little bit of climbing, and there's a lot of slick rock, and route finding can be difficult during many times of the year. So this alignment improves safety, and there would be features added to make it more accessible to the broader public. This part of the trail doesn't exist at all right now, so it would create a loop that would connect back to the West Glacier Trail for this high loop. For those alternatives that include motorized boat service, this is where we would also see that remote glacier visitor area and different options for docking and unloading over near the glacier. All right, and I think the last thing I'm pointing out here is the Steep Creek Boardwalk and Stream Restoration. This is proposed in all of the alternatives. The boardwalk looks a little bit different in all of the alternatives in terms of the length of the boardwalk, if this loop is included, the number of viewing platforms along the boardwalk. But the boardwalk is included in all alternatives. We're exploring the best way to cross over Steep Creek on the Glacier Spur Road, or cross the Glacier Spur Road when you're walking along Steep Creek. Last year, we proposed this pedestrian underpass and bridge over Steep Creek that would cross over here. And so we provided this image as kind of an idea of what we thought it would look like, where both humans and bears would use that underpass to walk from one side to the other of the Glacier Spur Road. We're also exploring other options for how to get across. This here is a bottomless arch culvert, so a very large culvert that would still accommodate wildlife passage. But we're looking at options where this would be reserved only for wildlife passage with people crossing on the street or crossing in a separate box culvert that's attached to the boardwalk and intended for human use only. So we're looking at different ways of accommodating that passage for people and for wildlife. Part of the need for that is there are some perched culverts that don't always allow salmon passage. And so we want to fix those culverts and replace it with something that will be more durable and better for wildlife. And then I also wanted to point out that as part of Steep Creek restoration, we proposed to realign the stream and improve the stream gradient for spawning salmon. So the idea here is to improve salmon habitat. We heard feedback from folks in last spring that this part of the project was poorly represented on maps. So I just want to point out that the light blue on all of these maps just depicts Steep Creek, and the dark blue on the maps depicts the portion of the stream that's proposed for restoration. So we do not propose any restoration work near the mouth of the stream at all. It's limited really to where the stream was originally moved when the Glacier Spur Road went in. All right, and I think that's going to end my presentation of the different alternatives and the many facets of the project. I'll do a little bit on the next step stuff, and then we can return to that after questions and answers as well. But just to get it out there, we know that we're in the supplemental DEIS period right now, a draft environmental impact statement, and all interested have the opportunity to comment. I appreciate that many of you already have. And that comment period is open until February 21st. We'll use those comments to write a final environmental impact statement and to inform the decision for this project. We'll release a draft record of decision that those who have commented during the project have the opportunity to object to. So folks can file an objection to the draft decision, and then we'll work through those objections to finally get to the final record of decision sometime this summer. So a few more steps there. And then I do have another how to comment slide, but I think I'll go back up. High to an overview slide to get us to our questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Monique. Okay, so we're going to start the question and answer portion of the evening. I just want to remind people of some of the things that will help us get through this. Okay. If you want to ask your question verbally, you can raise your hand and we will call on you to ask your question. You can come off mute, ask your question in the order that you raise your hand. I want to remind you that asking a question today is not considered an official public comment submission. Okay. Comments must be officially submitted through the comment portal or received in writing by February 21st. So this is intended for you to help answer your questions so that you can develop your comments. Okay. So I don't see any hands up yet, but I have a couple in the chat. I'm going to go to the chat first. Okay. And I'll read it for you, Monique. Okay. Would Steep Creek no longer go through the pond?
Pete, would you like to take that one?
Certainly. Right, and I'm assuming you're talking about once the culverts get removed and a bridge or bottomless arch goes in, that pond area immediately downstream of the crossing will probably still exist in some capacity, if that's what you're referring to, the pond. What it really will come down to is what the creek needs over the length of where it gets rechannelized. And because what we really ultimately want to do is maintain the right grade. There's a section where the pond is that it's actually really a flat grade, which has caused the pond. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a result of the road being where it is. But then alternatively downstream from there, there's a section that's oversteepened, and that's not necessarily a good thing. The fish really can't use that area at all. Any life stage, there's no spawning habitat, and the fry can't really go upstream and downstream. The water's too fast. So once the grade gets all reset to the proper salmon-friendly grade that the stream is going to function well at, there may or may not be some ponds left in that area, but it would generally go through that same area.
Thank you, Pete. We'll go to Alex first. Go ahead, Alex. You can come off mute and ask your question.
Yes, I think you said this before, but in our comments, it's all right to mix and match. It's not like alternative. It's this alternative or that alternative. You're still integrating comments moving forward.
Absolutely. And, you know, when we designed alternatives 5, 6, and 7, we tried to construct them as packages that made sense, right? So we didn't try to throw in a whole bunch of random stuff that wouldn't work well together. We tried to construct full alternatives, but the decision maker does have the flexibility to pull parts from other alternatives that he thinks would form the best decision altogether. And so commenters are welcome to do the same thing. If you like alternative 5, except you'd prefer it to have an element of alternative 6, you can just describe those elements. You don't even need to identify the alternative if it's easier for you to just describe what components you like and why.
And you said that there were 4 alternatives with the ferry system and 3 without. Could you tell us what those are and what those categories are?
Yeah, so alternative 1 is the no action alternative, right? So that's if we do nothing. So that one doesn't have boats. Alternative 4 we designed last year, and that one was designed as kind of a lower level infrastructure alternative. And so consistent with that theme, it didn't include any motorized boats. And then alternative 6, which we just released this month, also does not include motorized boats. And that one was really designed to be responsive to many of the local comments that we've heard. And so it does not include motorized boat service. And that's the one, it's one of the ones that includes the little circulator shuttle and it includes the Hillside Welcome Center. So we tried to package that one up.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Monique. Okay, we're gonna do one chat before we get to you, Doug. Here's one for you, Monique. I didn't see alternative 4 shown for the Steep Creek crossing schematics. Could you please describe what is planned for that alternative?
Well, I need to consult my alternatives table, unless Carrie, do you know? I'll make sure I get it right.
Yep, alternative 4 was very similar to 6. Sorry, not to 6, but it was similar to the ones that show the crosswalk going over. And then I'm not sure if you had that on your schematic, but the boardwalk doesn't continue upstream past Glacier Spur Road.
Okay,
But it's a
Thank you.
crosswalk over Glacier Spur.
okay.
Yep. All right, so I'll repeat it, right? So a bridge for wildlife underpass, a crosswalk for humans going across Glacier Spur Road, but no boardwalk on the other side. Thanks.
All right, Doug, we're gonna go to you next. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, thanks. This question is for Monique. You mentioned something about adopting the, I guess you call them user-made trails and dredge lakes. What do you mean by adopting? Do they have some maintenance involved or improvements? Maybe you could explain that.
Trying to get to them. There we go. Yeah, so these yellow ones that are depicted on these maps. Yeah, so those are pretty recently new to the Dredge Lakes area. They're narrow single track trails, and the Forest Service didn't construct them, right? So they're constructed by users. And what we would do in adding them to our system is we would check them for safety. If there are areas of severe erosion, we might harden some surfaces or reinforce some surfaces. If bridges are needed to replace, like pallet bridges or 2x4 bridges, then we would put in safer crossings where needed. But for the most part, we would just leave them alone, and they would show up on our maps. And those places that already show them up on maps, there are some apps that already have them depicted. We'd be able to work together a little bit better to share responsibility for naming and maintaining and advertising those trails.
Thanks, Monique. Okay, another question from the chat. What is the average time spent at the glacier from visitors arriving by commercial bus?
The time that we usually state is approximately 1 hour. James, do you have anything to add to that? No.
I don't know if you said James or Pete, but yeah, 60 to 90 minutes is generally what we see.
Thanks, Pete.
Okay, another question from the chat, Monique. Can you summarize the views of commenters on the DEIS in regards to motorized boat traffic on the lake? Do you know how many comments there were? What % were opposed to the use of motorized boats on the lake? Do you know any of that yet?
We got about 400 comments on the draft environmental impact statement. And I would say maybe 10 to 20 were in favor of motorized boat service, and the vast majority were opposed to motorized boat service.
Okay, let's stay on boats for another question from the chat. It's kind of a two-part question. The first one is, how would the lake boats work? Would the lake need to be dammed because there isn't enough water for boats? And then the second part, and I can say this one again if you need to. And how would 49 passenger boats work on busy tour days when you have several thousand tourists in the glacier and they're only given an hour at the glacier before heading off to whale watching?
Well, some operations are unknown, but we can speak to many of those things. We did complete a bathymetry study, so we know lake depths in the area can accommodate boats. However, we do not have a navigation chart, and so that's something that would be needed for feasibility and safety before putting commercial boats on the lake. So there's certainly things to figure out. Commercial boats would be operated under some sort of special use permit, which would require operating plans and safety guidelines and, rescue plans and spill plans, a variety of things to ensure safety and to protect the environment. The 49 passenger boats, we envision having 2 to 3 of them on the lake at a time. We estimate in the visitor capacity analysis the number of people who would be able to be transported back and forth across the lake. We estimate it based on boat service every half hour throughout the day during the commercial use period, April to October. So every half hour, a 49 passenger boat goes across the lake and delivers somebody near the base of the glacier.
So Monique, I'm going to ask one more question in there. It's related to boats. It came later in the chat, but how long would it take to get across the lake? And do we know how many will be operating at one time?
Did we estimate that? Brian, do you know that?
It's only 15 minutes because we would be going no more than 8 knots so as to not create waves. And so the total turn is about a half hour. And with 3, I think there's a scheme that actually has 4 boats going. That's just a regular service back and forth across the lakes. You would not be able to make that trip within an hour or even an hour and a half visit. You would have to have an extended visit at the glacier to be able to add that to your trip.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to Sally. Sally, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is actually Frank, but that's all right.
Hi, Frank.
Would the boats be allowed to hover by Nugget Falls? And then second, did the Chugach Forest experience with Portage Glacier and boats inform you at all about how that worked up there? Because I think they have boats to the glacier and the issues it might raise.
I'll call on James again and see if you'd like to share anything on that, James.
Sure. Hi, Frank. So as far as looking at the example of the boats up at Baggage Boggs Visitor Center, yes, we did look at that a little bit as an example to see what was working there. And there is still an active boat service that goes up around the corner into the face of the glacier. As far as hovering around the waterfall, no, that is not part of the concept. The concept is that it would take boats from near the visitor center directly across and let people out in the gravel area that's in front of the face of the glacier now.
Good. All right. I'm going to go to another question from the chat. I realize that I misspoke earlier. If anyone's trying to raise your hand and you can't find that, it's not under the participants button. It's under the reactions button. My apologies. So if you're trying to raise your hand and you can't, click your reactions button. Okay, that's my fault. I'm sorry. Okay, another question. How would you keep bears out of the underroad crossing that is for people only?
Who would like to answer that? James?
So, sure, I'll take that one. There are various barriers that can be used to separate humans and bears. So the assumption would be the walkway coming up Steep Creek is an elevated walkway, again, to separate wildlife from, or people from wildlife. And so you could fence that as it comes and connects to a tunnel that goes under the road. There would be ways to do that.
Thanks, James. Okay, another one. Okay, this is a facility improvement plan, yet there are clearly management issues included, such as changing boundaries of the management units. What has been done with the comments on proposed management unit changes, such as inclusion of the entire shoreline as part of the visitor center unit, taking space from Dredge Lake, where commercial use is not to be allowed?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. That is very much a nuance of the project and worth touching on. Let's see, let me get down to where we're talking about. So we generally speak to the Mendenhall as having 3 different management units. There's the visitor center unit, which is really the hub of activity. There's the Dredge Lakes unit, which has never had any commercial use in it. And then there's the West Glacier unit, which is much more quiet than the visitor center unit, but does have commercial use for the West Glacier Trail, as well as all of the paddle trips, right? So the kayaks and the canoes and the rafts all leave from the West Glacier unit, and the bike tours go in and out of the West Glacier unit as well. So when we're working on this infrastructure improvements project, we looked at sort of the expectations of the user experience in those different units. And right now, the visitor center unit is expected to be kind of an urban experience, right? Where you're likely to be in crowded areas. There's going to be a lot of cars. There's going to be a lot of interaction with other people. And so the visitor center unit is more of an urban environment. For those alternatives that propose motorized boat use, we included the lake and the remote glacier area as part of the visitor center unit, reflecting that there would be a lot of people and often more of a crowded experience as you traverse the lake and land with, 35 or 50 other folks over on the far side. We are also proposing commercial use of the Lakeshore Trail, right? So this area, this is alternative 2, where the Lakeshore Trail stays along the shoreline. That varies among alternatives. But we propose commercial use of the Lakeshore Trail. And in many of the alternatives, we absorb that into the visitor center unit, again, to account for the commercial use that would traverse between the visitor center unit and the West Glacier unit. So account for that commercial use. And really the intent there is just to be able to describe the expected experience of visitors when it comes to, interactions with others and what we consider the recreation opportunity spectrum. So what kind of recreation opportunities you have. But it does have the effect that we've separated the Lakeshore Trail from the rest of Dredge Lakes, right? And so in some cases we may say, well, Dredge doesn't have any commercial use, but we moved the Lakeshore Trail into the visitor center unit, so there would be commercial use up on that northern part of Dredge and along the lakeshore. So I think it's, it's something to point out. I appreciate the commenter pointing that out. I think the primary issue there is like, will commercial use be introduced to Dredge Lakes? And so I would encourage you to look at that and say, okay, well, is it proposed, just on the Lakeshore Trail? Is it not proposed at all? Is it proposed in a commercial loop that would likely be going around Dredge Lakes? And, how will that impact visitors' experiences, whether they're, local or visiting from out of town?
Okay, Monique, I know we talked about that for a little bit, but I just want to bring up the second part of that question was, we received comments about that the first time, right? And so how do these new alternatives address those comments? And if you need a minute,
Yeah, or maybe Carrie can take it. I think alternative 6 keeps commercial use and dredge to the lakeshore trail only and not the commercial loop all the way around dredge. Is probably
That's
the
right,
primary
Monique.
response.
okay, go ahead, Carrie. Do you want to add to that or you're just confirming?
I was just gonna say that she's correct. We include the Lakeshore Trail in alternative 6, but most of the Dredge Lakes unit in 6 is kept in Dredge Lakes. So there's no commercial in that.
All right, thank you. Okay. All right, I'm gonna go on to, maybe this is an easier one to answer. Ready? Okay. If a bridge is built over the river, will the Forest Service plow it in the winter?
Looks like James has an answer.
That is a really good question, and that's ultimately a management decision. But the assumption that we've kind of been going with is lots of folks have interest in using it for snow purposes, specifically cross-country skiing. So the assumption is that we would not plow it. It would be used for cross-country skiing. But again, that's a management decision for the district to make down the road.
Thanks, James. All right, I'm gonna go to Skip. You have your hand up. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thanks. Yesterday at a meeting with a few of you, I brought up the subject of how I think unfairly you have visually represented the various welcome center options. There are no pictures at all that show a complete vision of the 2 new options. The one that's been tucked into the mountainside by the main parking lot, you can see there in this image, you only see parts of the building there, and it's from a distance, unlike the one that shows the first alternative, where there are these great establishing shots from several directions. And from the old EIS, they were very romanticized with sunsets in the windows reflecting and lights at night. And it's a really unfair representation or presentation to the public to give them a good idea of what they even are looking at or what they should be thinking about it. You're very, I think, directing their emotions to choose what I perceive as being your preferred alternative, although I'm sure you will deny that.
Okay, so I think that the question is.
So the question is there a way to fix this problem either during this round of the process or by having another draft DEIS before the final?
Go ahead, Monique. Thanks, Skip.
Brian, would you like to speak to that?
Sure, I'll speak to, well, actually, she's got the slide up. So the comments that we received on the draft environmental impact statement had to do with the visual impact specific to that, basically a new urban building at the location of the pavilion. And the requests were for us to analyze the visual impacts at that. So significant investment was made in modeling and rendering all 3 alternatives from those specific viewpoints, because those were what were identified as the viewpoints, and also the setting for the Historic Visitor Center was represented in that as well. So significant investment was made to develop these models that you see, and very, very deliberately, they were all modeled in the same manner to focus on the massing of the building set in the context of the environment. So if you'll notice on these renderings, the environment is beautifully rendered and very naturally rendered in the 3. So our intent was to to take a step back on rendering the materiality of the building and instead focus on the impact of the massing of the building in the context, and specifically in the context of the setting of the historic visitor center. So what you're seeing in this visual analysis is a significant investment, actually more even than those previous renderings. And so it wasn't that we were avoiding doing those types of renderings. We were very deliberately taking a step back from what you just described as a romanticized view of the building itself, and making it more about the impact of the building upon the site and the setting and the views. So that's where the effort went in this round of efforts.
Okay, Skip, I know you have your hand up again. Do you have another question?
I guess it's hard to have a question without being able to put it first. I guess the question is still, can we somehow add better images of the new alternatives before this process is over, or have another draft EIS to address that? I really think it's unfair to the public and to the new alternatives to not even have a single picture that shows what these buildings actually look like.
Okay, so I think that, so Monique, if you want to just quickly answer about the scope of work right now, and if that will happen, and then I'll follow up, and those are the things that are going to need to be submitted in writing at this time, Skip. But go ahead, Monique, if you want to answer that question directly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a determination will need to be made in how to address your concern. I am confident that the level of design that has gone into the buildings is sufficient to inform the decision maker's decision, and that we fully understand the design feasibility of the buildings and the environmental impacts of the buildings, and that they can accommodate the proposed uses. So I think the information is sufficient to inform the forest supervisor, but we may find through public comments that I'm wrong in that statement, and that more information is needed. The design, I will state, the design of the Welcome Center at the commercial lot in Alternative 7 that's not depicted here was designed largely similar to what the Welcome Center proposed on the Lakeshore in Alternatives 2, 3, and 4 was. So those are very similar designs, and just not provided in that alternate setting.
Another question from the chat. I've heard mention of food and beverage service in the Welcome Center. It's my understanding food is not allowed in the MGRA for bare human safety. Please explain the rationale. James?
Oh, this is a fun one. It's all about pie. Food would not be allowed outside the building. That is important. We do not want to attract bears. The concept came from many years ago when the visitor center was first built. There was a small cafe in there that served hamburgers and pie. And so the concept of food is that as visitors come to the visitor center, there's often mixed parties. You have groups that have older grandparents, parents, and kids. The kids may want to run to the waterfall. The parents may want to go to the visitor center to see displays, and the grandparents may want to just sit down and enjoy a nice view and be able to look out the window and maybe have a piece of pie or a cup of coffee or something. So that is the concept around food in the Welcome Center.
Thanks, James.
I will add also that food is currently allowed in the pavilion. So while we don't sell food, people do carry food to the Mendenhall, and they're allowed to consume it in the pavilion, but in very few other places in the visitor center unit because of bear activity. So it would alter where food is allowed to be consumed. And in this case, it would be consumed inside instead of outside.
Okay, Monique, we're going to move back to a few comments about commercial use again. Okay. We're going to two different comments. First one. What constitutes commercial use? Are guided hikes commercial use? Aren't there already guided hikes and dredge lakes?
I'm happy to answer, but I wonder if Pete would like to address that one.
Sure. Well, so let's see, there is already some guided hikes taking place, but I wouldn't call it in the dredge lakes area proper. The guided hikes that take place are predominantly occurring up around the lakeshore on the Marine Ecology Trail. So it's very close to the visitor center unit proper. And they move out along the steep creek, close to that drainage, and then out to the lakeshore and back. Not in what most people might consider the dredge lakes, not down by Moraine Lake or Moose Lake or along the Dike Trail, for example. So in commercial use, and I might not give the definition that's in the textbook, but commercial use is any activity that is generating an income, is generating money, and they're charging clients to take them out. And that would include taxis. That's a commercial enterprise, and Gas and O Guides is a commercial enterprise that takes place out in that area. But again, it's really in what we call the visitor center unit, not in the dredge unit.
Okay, there's going to be a follow-up here, and you already addressed it a little bit, but I just want to ask the question directly. The question was, isn't the Marine Ecology Trail part of the Dredge Lakes Trail system? And you've already said that, yes, there is commercial use along the Marine Ecology Trail. But so I guess that's about management unit, right? Is the Marine Ecology Trail part of the Dredge Lakes unit?
I guess officially I'd have to look at a map.
I think Monique knows. Hold on, let's go to Monique.
Yeah, let's go to Monique. Thank you.
Right, and I don't have it up either, but I think that, similar to how we proposed to modify the boundary to go along the Lakeshore Trail, the boundary of the visitor center unit follows the Marine Ecology Trail.
Okay, so the answer is the Marine Ecology Trail would be part of the visitor center unit, right?
And we do have those maps, so we can confirm it.
I have it up, and you're correct, Monique.
Okay,
it is existing in the visitor center unit right now.
As currently. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Carrie.
Okay, next question. Okay, I'm going to read the whole thing. I was just trying to bear with me. Clearly, something needs to be done to see the glacier as it's rapidly receding. Yet, if there's 4 boats with 49 passengers and the only way is to take the boat, you need to stay 1.5 hours. Do you not foresee countless numbers of angry tourists who wouldn't have the time to get to the face of the glacier? So do we know if tourists are going to have time to do that tour?
I can take it unless someone else would, James.
I can take it. And then you can add to it. What we've seen in the past, for quite a few years, there was just 1 hour allocated for people to enjoy the glacier when the buses dropped people off and then picked them back up. And then as the trail opened to the waterfall, it became pretty clear that people couldn't enjoy the hike out to the waterfall and see the visitor center. And so the time increased. The industry listened to the public and learned that they wanted more time. And so they adjusted. So now many of the tours are 90 minutes. So under that, as we visited with the industry under that same scenario, if there's a opportunity to ride the boat across the lake, and that's a 2-hour adventure, then the industry would likely adjust to that as visitors asked for that opportunity.
Thanks, James. Okay, another question, Monique. Has there been any research done to determine how many people would have enough time to use the shoreline trail, the Lakeshore Trail?
Anybody else want to take that one? James or Brian? I don't know if we've addressed that.
What was the question again? I want to make sure I answer the correct one.
Have we done any specific research to determine how many people would have enough time to use the Lakeshore Trail?
Yes, we have, and during the normal visit, even the short visits, this view right here, you can see the trail goes out, and then there's a point. That point right there is a very beautiful viewing point. So to get there and back is a doable trip for most people. And in addition to that, they'd be able to enjoy Steep Creek or a visit to the visitor center. And some might choose to do it a little bit further. So we imagine that most folks are just going to go out to the point, or maybe to the point across the creek from there as part of their visit.
And I would add to that, the concept of building a trail from the visitor center along the edge of the lake and a bridge over to the campground is not a new concept. It's been talked about in Juneau for a long, long time. It's actually part of some of the transportation plans that the city has done. It's kind of seen as a missing link as you look at the Under Thunder Trail and the trail along the Mendenhall River. And so a lot of that use is anticipated to be locals.
Okay. Brian, the next question. There's a lot of comments in here too, but I'm going to try to extract the question for you. It's about the building. It's about the Welcome Center building. Okay. The person thinks that the Welcome Center is not attractive. It's big, it's blockish, it's square, blaring white. Has there been consideration to something that looks more environmentally attractive?
Well, now I need that rendering that Skip was asking for. These are just showing the massing of the building. So the materials are all shown as white, which is part of what you're reacting to. The visitor center that's set into the hillside would be built with materials similar to the existing visitor center. And a lot of those things are details that are developed later in design after concept. So this is early on in concept design. In the end, we imagine that any version of the Welcome Center will have materials that match the historic visitor center, kind of the modernist language of it. The interpretation of what is, I think it was environmental, or I can't remember the word, that varies. And we imagine that that would be something that would evolving through the later phases of design with input from public.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go back to food just for a second. Would the food aromas emanating from the Welcome Center and nearby garbage bins draw more bears to the area?
That's a great question. It's hard to say. Right now there's no rule that people can't sit in their car and eat out there. And certainly we've seen evidence where bears are not shy about approaching vehicles that might have food in them. And we do our best to educate the public, as the rest of the community does as well. It's an ongoing issue. That said, we won't be keeping dumpsters outside. We don't do that now, and we wouldn't do that with the new facility, even if we provided food in the Welcome Center. All that would be handled just as is what's happens now, where we haul the trash immediately. It's all stored inside. As far as smells, it would be really hard to answer that. I think maybe there's a concept that it would really depend on how that the food service came to be. I don't know if it would be snacks or if it would be a little bit of pie. I don't know about a full-fledged restaurant. that would all come later, probably as we progressed in this, if the concept is supported. So, but that said, I do recall walking over to people cooking in their RV in the parking lot, and they were inside their RV and their food was inside the RV, but the smells were coming out, and we were concerned about that, and we spoke to them, and they were more than happy to oblige and stop cooking in their RV, because I think it was bacon and it really smelled good. So that is an issue. It's hard to know exactly how the bears would react, but it's an ongoing issue everywhere, and education is usually the key, and having rangers there to help educate folks and address the issues is also something that would still be prevalent.
Thanks, Pete. Okay, we're gonna go back to the boats. How loud would the boats be?
I'll send that to Brian.
It varies by the alternative proposed. I believe alternative 2 allowed for alternative fuel boats. And most of the other alternatives with boats allow electric only. So the motor noise is reduced significantly. It's really quite quiet once you go electric. Even on the alternatives, there are really strict noise criteria spelled out in that alternative and it's I believe lower than anywhere in the United States right now, except there is a place in California that is proposing that level of noise. So much less noisy than you're used to, and the boat speed being limited limits the noise as well. But the biggest controller of the noise is when we go to electric, where the noise of the motor is so little that really it's just the vibration of the propeller that's creating the noise. So very, very little compared to what you're used to with a boat.
Okay, another kind of boat operation type management question. Since there are management items in the plan, would the Forest Service consider committing to any boat service that is provided being operated strictly on a nonprofit basis to keep the prices as low as possible and ensure access to people not on cruise ships, with the Forest Service managing ticket prices?
James?
So that's a great thought. And the process would be, if a decision is made to allow boats on the lake, then there would be a prospectus process of reaching out to the private industry to see what people would put forward to provide boats on the lake. There would be lots of sideboards in that process. For example, some of the things that Brian was just talking about, speed and noise and those sorts of things. And one of the things we have talked about is locals pricing and maybe one-way trips. If you hike out, then you can ride the boat back. So all of those things are certainly possibilities. And again, those are decisions that would be made through the management process that the district would go through as they put that prospectus together and move forward with that process. Again, if boats are chosen as part of the final decision.
Okay, Kim, I want to ask you if you want to, do you want to come up off mute and ask a question? I know you can't find the, I want to give you the opportunity to ask your question if you want to. If you want to ask a question, Kim, you can. I'm going to move on to another boat question in the interim though. Would the boats be only for the tourist season, or would they extend for locals until the lake froze and or begin in April for locals?
Part of the proposal to increase visitor capacity is actually extending what we consider the commercial use season. So right now we talk about it being May to September, but when you look at the capacity analysis, we actually extend that commercial use season from April through October, since we are seeing a lot of cruise ships come in early and come in late. And we anticipate that there'll be more of that in the future. So I think the answer is both. So it would be during the commercial use season, but commercial use will likely remain much lighter on the beginning and the end of that season and have more availability for locals. Anything to add there, James?
No, you covered it.
Okay, I'm gonna, go ahead, Kim. I know you've been trying to, go ahead.
This is Deb Brutus. I'm using Kim's computer and I'm not familiar with it, so I'm screwing it up a bit. So my question is, as it is now, when the bears are using the Dredge Lakes, well, the Steep Creek area, a lot of it's closed to visitor use. And my question is, has there been consideration on bear use of the Dredge Lakes area and the Lakeshore area, and how would that affect trail closures in the future?
Thank you very much.
Pete, would you like to take that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can definitely say we have certainly factored in bear use in the dredge area into all of the considerations that we've tried to factor in. Most of that is the trails that are out there and possibly the commercial use. The fact is the bears are out there now, and even though some of these trails aren't officially adopted, the use is still occurring out there. And yes, we do have the seasonal closures for around the Steep Creek when the sockeye are in, and actually it extends a little bit beyond that, right? We usually have that closure take place before the fish show up, and it's certainly until the fish are all gone, and that includes all the coho that go well into the fall. Now the Dredge Lake is fishy as Steep Creek, if you will, but there are still some fish populations in there, but we don't see bears using that area quite the same as Steep Creek. So I would caution anyone that has those concerns. The bears don't quite use the area the same. That's not to say they don't go through the dredge, and certainly they do come through there. There's also quite a bit more area for them to spread out. So consequently, we have to analyze that a little differently. We know where the bears are going to be in the Steep Creek area, and pretty much we know where the people are going to be. In dredge, it's a little bit different. They're by and large going to be on the trails, but of course they're not limited to that. So it's more of a free for all out in there. It's more of a wild area. And in a way, the Forest Service might not always guarantee that we're going to manage a wild area, just like we wouldn't manage something up on Mount McGinnis or back in the Nugget Valley, for example. But that said, a lot of the trails that we have along the shoreline, that would probably have a railing. There's going to be elevated portions. I would assume that the bears would also avoid those areas if there's nothing out there for them. It's certainly an area that they could walk through, traverse through, but there's not a significant, consistent draw like there would be in Steep Creek.
Thanks, Pete.
I'll add a little bit to that one, and Pete, you can correct me if I misspeak here. But let's see, you can see in small print over here, Steep Creek is the blue line. And right now, the Steep Creek boardwalk, follows some of this line, but also follows this pink dotted line. I guess that's part of marine ecology and runs into Steep Creek. So what happens is the portions of these trails that are on the east side of the creek remain open, and those on the west side of the creek end up getting closed to have some privacy for bears that are fishing right along Steep Creek to keep them a little safer on the west side. So the new proposal is to put the whole boardwalk on the east side so that visitors are not crossing the creek. And so although there's trails over here, when people are near Steep Creek, this trail would no longer be an issue and wouldn't require a closure. And the Steep Creek where most of the visitors would be hanging out are entirely on the east side and would not have that closure.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. And Deb, the trail that does get closed on the west side, that would actually get eliminated. That paved path that's back there, that would actually get removed, and that area would be people free essentially. So thanks for pointing that out.
Okay, some more boat questions. Do boats on baggage bogs allow landings on the shore for disembarking?
No.
Okay. Another boat question. How will boat disturbance to nesting Arctic terns and gulls be avoided?
There are three things that have been considered to that question. One is the boat noise limitations, especially going to all electric, but even in the alternative fuels, the noise constraints are quite limiting. Speed, which limits wake activity, and then to the extent possible in the bathymetry, keeping your distance from the shoreline.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, we're gonna go to Brad. Hello, Brad.
Hello, Holly. Yeah, I just have a question probably for Monique or Pete, but you mentioned earlier in the Dredge Lakes area that there's some waterfowl hunting that goes on down there. And I was wondering if those trails that are adopted into your plan are in fact adopted, would there be any change in management for the waterfowl hunting in that area? Thank you.
Pete, I'll let you take that.
Oh, that was very nice of you, Monique. You know what? I'm trying to remember exactly how we were figuring that out, because that's a great question, Brad. The idea is that the trails, you need to have a set amount of distance between the trail and where weapons are fired. But do know that the hunting regulations are not set by the Forest Service. They're actually set by the Fish and Game. So it would probably be a negotiation with the Fish and Game to figure that out. But Monique, I think I'm missing something. I think there was some other things that we might have discussed as well.
Yeah, so there are buffers on trails and roads, and they're bigger on roads. So I think it's, I don't know what the distances are. I don't remember whether it was a mile off of, maybe it's a half mile off a road and a quarter mile off a trail, something like that, where it's bigger off of a road. And this campground over here is a road, for example, and its buffer extends all the way into Dredge and impacts hunting on Norton Lake. And then trails have a smaller buffer, but the hunting area is limited by the designated trails. And so originally we proposed to designate all of the trails in this area and throughout Dredge Lakes. And then what you're referring to, Brad, is our proposal to modify that and not designate the ones near Glacier Lake so that those buffers on the trails would not eliminate hunting opportunities there.
Great, thank you.
All right. Couple more. We're at 7:13. Okay, Monique, just so we're keeping track of time. Doesn't the fact that tours require people to be there for longer periods of time negate the attempt to reduce congestion? Have we factored that into the numbers?
Brian, would you like to take that?
Yes, we factored that into the numbers. There's been a couple of considerations in the numbers. We're assuming that just because there are more opportunities, that more people will be asking the tour companies to stay longer. So the numbers have assumed overall that the average stay will increase. And we've also factored in the fact that if the boats are part of the final solution, that would keep more people on site longer. So in the projections of the visitors that led to the capacity numbers you've seen, those things have been considered.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, I'm sorry, GM, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. You've given me a lot of good information, but I'm coming to this process a little bit late, and there's a lot of stuff to consider here. And so I have lots of questions, and thankfully many of them have been asked already by others. But I want to be able to get a chance to look at like the entire thing that's already been done, so I'm not just repeating questions. Will there be another opportunity like this to ask questions again before the comment period closes?
Go ahead, Monique.
Yeah, my phone number and email are all over any of the advertisements or update emails that go out, and you're welcome to call me and ask questions at any time. We don't have another like public webinar or meeting scheduled, but I am happy to talk to anybody individually.
Well, in that case, I do have a couple of quick questions, if you'll allow me. One is, I didn't specifically see any mention of like signage, but will there, I assume there will be new signage to go along with this to direct people. But will that be in English only, or will we be including the native Alaska Native languages as well?
Brian, do you want to speak to the interpretive plan, or Pete?
I will, yeah. Parallel with this process, an interpretive master plan was developed for Mendenhall Glacier Recreation Area, a new interpretive master plan, and that interpretive master plan contemplates the multiple languages on the signage, and specifically Alaska Native language on the signage is in consultation with local tribes.
Excellent. And then I guess the one real main question is, the whole premise of this seems to be that use is going to increase, but we already have like a pretty full pack of like cruise ships coming in. How many more people do we realistically think we can squeeze in here and still have people enjoying themselves?
I'd like to send that one to Brian as well.
Thanks, man. You give me the easy ones. So the increase that I'll take a step back. So the design of the facilities is based around the peak hour number of visitors to the visitor center. There are the big numbers that add up when you put them over the year, but ultimately the facilities themselves are designed around the peak number of visitors per hour. And we're already getting close to what that peak is going to be when the biggest possible ships show and each berth is full in Juneau. You have a capacity of plus or minus 20,000 passengers, and approximately half of those come to Mendenhall as part of the visit. Right now, there are days when almost that many visitors are getting, which gives you a peak hour of about 4,000 people. So what this whole master plan contemplates is the number of peak hours is increasing. We're already seeing a lot of them on more days and more hours per day. So ultimately, I just think it knows that more of those hours will see that level of visitor load. So it's not like there's more people showing up at once. It's about 10% more, 15% more on that day when every ship is completely full. But it's more that there'll be more times when that density is there. And so the whole purpose of these proposed improvements is to better deal with that density of people at the peak hour that we're already seeing more and more frequently.
Holly, you're on mute.
I did so good for like almost 2 hours. Okay, yes. I know your name is not Kim, and I forget what your name is. Is it Deb, I think?
Yeah, this is Deb Brutus. I have a quick question. I tried to write it in the text with not much luck.
It's okay, go ahead.
Okay, the process of the final EIS or the final draft, can that incorporate components from various alternatives, or does it have to be strictly one alternative's options?
Okay, and that's a great question. And I can't remember if you answered this already, Monique, but there was another question that came in the chat earlier, which is the same one, and I'm going to read it. Can components of different alternatives be combined in the final plan? Okay, go ahead.
Yep, and the answer is yes. So, you know, federal agencies use the National Environmental Act analysis process to sort of analyze the scope of any federal undertaking. And so here we've looked at a lot of different ways to accomplish the purpose of the project. And I said before, we've tried to package things all together into very sensical alternatives where we think, you know, these things would fit together. And we do that to try to be as transparent as possible, right? So that we're not going to surprise you with some, you know, pick and plug sort of alternative that you never expected to come together. So we've tried to design alternatives that fit nicely together and would make sense to adopt all as one. But essentially in creating all of these alternatives, we've created a large decision space for the forest supervisor to decide upon how to move forward for the Mendenhall. And so the forest supervisor will have the ability to pick components of different alternatives in his or her decision.
Thanks, Monique.
Thank you.
We have one question we haven't gotten to yet. Will you display the posters in the pavilion again? That would be helpful for people to envision the alternatives.
We do not have the posters available in the pavilion right now. Yeah, they are just posted online, and we do have posters available in the visitor center to look at inside when it's open on the weekends. But we don't plan to put them in the pavilion.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, go ahead, GM.
So currently there's a cost for using the whole glacier area now. Will that be increasing with all of these improvements?
James?
So as I believe it was Carla pointed out, a lot of this is around infrastructure and proposing new infrastructure. A companion plan to this is a management plan. There is an existing management plan, but a new one needs to be updated for all of the improvements that get, or if improvements are decided out of this EIS process, then a new management plan or an updated management plan would need to be created. So will the cost go up? At this point, we don't have that answer, but if, but it's a possibility. And again, that's a decision that's made at the district level as they go through that management plan process.
And I would just add real quickly, the costs are associated just with the central infrastructure currently at the visitor center. You don't need a pass or have to pay to go out and to dredge or to Nugget Falls, for example.
All right, Skip, go ahead. Skip, if you're trying to ask a question, you're still on mute.
Sorry about that. Could you just describe a little better the Shoreline Trail and some of these other big trails in terms of how wide they are and the fact that it will be big enough to drive emergency vehicles on, and how that compares to what I would call a trail? These are more like what I would call roads, literally allowing motorized vehicles to pass on them. How does that affect the imprint of the roads and the cost of doing that? What's the difference between making one suitable for driving a fire truck on as opposed to one for just people?
Thanks, Skip.
Brian, would you like to take that one?
So the width of each of the trails is driven by anticipated uses more than the emergency vehicle requirement, because emergency vehicles can be small for certain trails. So you can send an ATV on a trail when needed, or just people when you can't fit an ATV. Lakeshore Trail specifically is the wide one, and it's designed to accommodate grooming for cross-country skiing. So that's what's driving the width of that. Now, the other driver of cost is the weight of the vehicle, of the potential emergency vehicle. So there are costs associated, especially with the water crossings, the elevated portions of Lakeshore Trail, that drive the cost up a little bit to be able to accommodate a vehicle, but it's not a lot. It's an incremental cost. So the cost of a bridge, once you've already been driven by the width and the span, and the fact that you have to design for a whole bunch of people, you have to design it as if there's a crowd on there, it actually approaches the pounds per square foot of a vehicle. So it's about a 10 to 15% increase is all in the bridge itself. versus what you would have accommodated already for the cross-country ski with the width. And then all of the other trails are narrower, and they're designed based on Forest Service classifications, which are very similar to Park Service classifications for the type of use. So I believe the perimeter trail was 8 feet. A lot of the internal trails, single track, is a 2 to 4 foot tread. And then I can't remember where we were on Glacier Spur Trail. I believe it was a 4 or 5 foot tread, but it's all based on those Forest Service classifications, and those are explained in the EIS as well as the appendix.
I would just add to that, the other piece of the design width is the use. We anticipate this will be a very popular trail with lots of users, including bikers and roller skaters and joggers and people that want to walk 3 or 4 abreast, and dogs on leashes that bikers are trying to avoid. So as we look around the country at those types of trails, wide ones are needed to accommodate all of that type of use.
Okay. I think I have time for one more question before we wrap up. Monique, this one is, what do you want to pull up that final slide that you had, or are you done?
I'm actually pulling up the website, which I think.
Oh, okay. Okay, go ahead. So NK, we'll get to your question in a second. Skip, you're asking how many people have been attending this. There's how many project team members are there? Are there 7, 8, 9 of us maybe? The attendance has been bouncing around between 50 and 54 people here tonight, and that includes the project team. So that's how many people have been here this evening. I think you had close to 100 at the public meeting. Not that many?
At the public meeting, we had 86.
Okay.
On
Almost
Tuesday.
Okay, almost 100 people. So this question again from NK, will you have another public open house at an accessible location? The last open house was difficult to get to for people with the dark and the stairs. I'll let you answer that question, Monique, and then you can start the wrap up with the website. Okay.
Okay.
So one more thing though, before Monique gets into it, Peyton, can you post the 3 things in the chat again, to the link for this website, the comment portal, as well as Monique's contact information, please. Okay, go ahead, Monique.
Yeah, so I just wanted to show people the website in case anybody has not visited. So the web address is up here. It'll be posted into the chat. You can identify it by its title up top. And then these are recently redesigned. This is like a standard Forest Service project website format. So it'll look the same if you look at any of the other things that we're up to on the Tongass as well. But essentially you scroll down and there are project documents down here. And they are in folders. So when you first land on the page and you scroll down to project documents, they're all in folders. And there is really a lot of information on here, stuff from the past, design work and interpretation plan, stuff from the EIS that we released in 2022, the management plans, current and past, things that are just notices and announcements. And then most of the stuff that I think most people are interested in right now are in the supplemental draft EIS and resource reports folder. It does move slow sometimes, but for me, it always works. I have heard some complaints that people had trouble. But in here are all of the things that I have talked about, right? So the order of them gets mixed up and it's hard to control, but here's the supplemental draft EIS volume 1. There's a volume 2, it's located down here right now, supplemental draft EIS volume 2. We have a bunch of resource reports that are posted here. And then a couple of things that I posted recently. I put new on to try to draw attention to them. So the webinar information was here. Alternatives comparison table that I've mentioned is here. The open house posters are here. So you can look at all of those online, and I shrunk their size so they should be downloadable. And you can click on these and you can download them all in a zip file, which most people don't want to do, or you can click on them individually and download. So that's how you get the information. And then if you look at the right-hand side of the page, we've provided direct links for commenting, but you can also click on the right side of the page for commenting. And there's, commenting on this project. We have the deadline there. You enter your information here, and when you enter it here, it makes it so that it's not publicly available. And then you can either write into this box, or you can just upload a file, which is what most people do, right? They write a letter. You can write it in Word, or you can handwrite it and scan it, whatever you choose to do. And you can select your file and upload it. We encourage you not to put your personal information in this letter text or in the letter that you upload, because those things are viewable online. You can get standing as a commenter by entering it in this private section over here. And then the last thing I'll show you is you can view other people's comments over here in this public comment or objection reading room. We're not in objections yet, but you can click over here and you can view the most recent comments, or you can sort things. If you want to look for something by a specific organization, you can click on organization and it'll sort that way. And you can read comments dating back all the way to 2020. So.
Okay, I would just like to remind everyone that the questions you asked, and maybe if there are comments that ended up in the chat, just remember that questions and comments tonight aren't considered an official project comment. You still have to go through the process of officially submitting your comments through this portal that Monique just described, or you can do it in writing as well. You can send a letter and fax it and drop it off at the Ranger District. And that information is in the chat. Again, the comment deadline is February 21st. And Monique is always available to answer additional questions if you have them. So if you think of other things, please don't hesitate. Okay. And I guess with that, it's 7:33. I really appreciate everything. And I thank you for being wonderful guests. Alex, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you to you and the rest of the staff that presented this information and informing us, and appreciate the opportunity to learn about the project and to be able to comment on it, and have appreciated also, it looks like that the process has been responsive to the comments that have come in previously.
Thanks very much. All right, thank you, everyone. I hope you, oh, okay, one last question. This is important. Where can we find this recording? I'm gonna process the recording tonight. Actually, not tonight. We'll likely get some captions on it. And Monique, it'll be available on the project website. Is that where the recording will be? Okay, all right.
Yep. So we'll link it there, and I'll send out, we also have for those of you that attended the open house, Brian, our architect, prepared a video that was streaming there. So we'll post both of these videos, and I'll send out a project update email to the mailing list and let you know when they're there.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your evening.